Brilliant. Okay, well, you know that we have been looking at God's big story all of the year. And as part of that, we have been looking at the stories of in the Bible. We're looking at the minute in Mark. But every single month, we have a story of somebody, an interview, somebody that tells their story. And so this is the Sunday where we're going to be listening and just finding out a little bit more about Si Parkin. So I wonder if we can give him a round of applause as he comes up. Si Parkin, this is brilliant. Do you want, are the chairs all right here, or do you want us to sit more centrally? You want us centrally? Okay, do you mind moving your own chair, Si? Is this all right? I know this wasn't part of the interview thing, but, here we go. Is it here? Is this all right? Brilliant. Got that pedal's flashing there. Is it all right, do you think? Good. Okay, so, Si, do you just want to tell us who you are and, a little bit about you?
Yep. Hi everyone, I'm Simon Parkin. I have been coming to this church for about 15 years.
Wow.
I lead worship here occasionally. My job is a freelance journalist. I write for magazines and newspapers, usually longer stories about things that interest me. And I've just signed a new book deal, which is what I'll be working on for the next year.
Wow, and are you married, or tell us about that?
I'm married to Nikki Parkin, who is a teacher at Wickbourne Infant White Meadows School, even, in Wick, and I've got 3 children, Huey, Jed, and Estelle, and last weekend, extraordinarily, Estelle turned 13, despite the fact she was only born 2 weeks ago. So.
Wow, you've got a teenager then?
Yeah, apparently.
Are you ready for it?
No, not at all.
I'm sure it'll be fine. It will be great. What? You say you came to church 15 years ago. What brought you here in the first place to this area?
So I grew up in South London, near Kew Gardens, if you've ever been there. And I went to a church in Richmond called Duke Street. My parents were Christians, and it was quite a traditional church, a large pipe organ, lots of Wesley hymns, is sort of what I grew up on. And then when I was 13, I went to Spring Harvest, which is a bit like Soul Survivor for maybe slightly older people and younger people. And there sort of got introduced to worship bands a little more like this. That sort of got me interested in music and in songwriting and learning the guitar, and I had a wonderful pair of youth leaders at Duke Street who would take us to events, and they actually brought us down here to a cutting-edge event on the beach when I was young, and I actually had a poster of Tim, your husband, on my bedroom wall.
Did you? Oh dear.
Not just Tim, obviously. Now it's just Tim. Okay. So Nick. Good. I was kind of, a delirious fan, I guess. And when I went to university in London, I met Ed Hawkins, who many of you will know, and we sort of were leading worship there at our Christian Union, and also we were going to a Church of England church in Pimlico called St James de Les, where we would lead worship as well. And I was starting to write songs, and together we came down to Littlehampton to record a little EP with Paul Burton, who many of you will know. Through that I met Andy Harson, who was playing keyboards this morning, and he sort of encouraged us to form a band, I guess, more seriously. Introduced me to Dan Boreham, who also goes to this church, and our drummer, Mikey Randon. And because of all those connections, we started a band, and when I got married, we were like, where should we live? And it's, we've made lots of connections here. Half of the people we played with lived here, so I moved down, and then Ed and Jenny followed afterwards.
Wow, well, we're glad that you did move down. It's been brilliant. But
thanks.
Tell us a little bit about how you grew up, about how you became a Christian, that kind of thing.
Okay, so like I say, my parents were Christians, and so in that way that sort of happened in the 80s, I guess, when I was about 5 or 6, I said a prayer in my bedroom to sort of commit my life to Jesus in the way that you do with the understanding of a 5-year-old. And then the process from there was just one of sort of growing and recommitting, trying to align my life with Christ's teachings, and sort of in that way would often go up again to sort of say a prayer at events I was at, and sort of deepened through that. At university I studied theology because I wanted to sort of understand more about the Bible and about Jesus, and also to sort of get some of that in the songs that I was writing at the time. And then, when I was 18, my parents split up. It was quite, I think it's, whenever there's divorce, it's always quite hard on the kids, but this was particularly difficult and traumatic. And so I sort of discovered God in a new way through that sort of pain and disorientation, and been continuing to work through that and try to live according to what Jesus taught ever since, really. Yeah.
Wow, that's brilliant. And then you became a writer. Mm-hmm. Do you want to just talk to us a little bit about that process? So you've written for some amazing places, haven't you? Like amazing. Tell us about who you write for, mm-hmm. and a little bit about that process.
Okay, so I'm a freelancer, so I'm free to kind of write for whoever I want to, but principally in the UK, I do my work with the Guardian newspaper, writing for, they have a section called the long reads, which are sort of very long, in-depth reported stories. Most recently, I went to Russia ahead of the World Cup to spend time with some neo-Nazis who were there, who are sort of football fans and who have co-opted football fans to sort of towards neo-Nazi beliefs and the rise of that in advance of the World Cup, because obviously there's been a lot of concern in our country in particular about going to the World Cup. Am I going to be attacked by Russian football hooligans, all of this kind of stuff. So that's the sort of thing that I sometimes do with The Guardian. Then I also write in America for The New Yorker, which is a magazine out there, and I'm a contributing writer, so I sort of write a bit for them here and there, and I'm also a critic for The Observer. So I've got a few kind of things, but that was a slow process to get to that point. Lots of hard work and writing for non-prestigious places, I guess, to sort of build up the skills and knowledge to get there.
And what did it feel like when you went to Russia? Was that really a scary experience? How did that feel? Because sometimes you're in quite dangerous. You've gone to quite extreme places, haven't you? How does that feel for you?
Yeah, I hadn't thought too much about it with Russia. I kind of thought, we'll go there, and I work with someone called a fixer, and that's someone who journalists work with, who sort of organise, they're local typically, and they organise meetings with people that are going to be relevant to your story. And she'd organised like a bunch of meetings with football hooligans who, would openly say, I'm a racist, I, believe such and such or whatever. And so I kind of was maybe a little apprehensive, but then when I finally got out there and you're sort of confronted with these views, and also people who are choosing to live their lives in that way. There was one guy in particular, he was quite charming, but also very frightening character. He kind of carried a very long knife that he was playing with while we were just eating, cupcakes or whatever, and sort of trying to tell me about his beliefs, and it's all quite frightening. He actually took us out to remote woods where they organise hooligan fights as sort of training places, and at that point the fixer was like, you need to let me know like where you are on Google Maps at all times and check in every 15 minutes. And I think when you suddenly get there and you're confronted with that situation and you're sort of walking into the trees, you're like, oh, hang on, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But at its best, I think the function of journalism is to sort of expose corruption in the world. It's to inform people about what they need to know, and that's sort of why you do these things and go to these places, because there's a sort of important, I guess, moral duty to it on some level.
Wow, that's incredible. And you've also, this was probably in the earlier days, but you would write about games, wouldn't you, as well? Did you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so how I started as a writer was I had an idea for a magazine while I was still at university. When I was a teenager, I'd read Record Collector, which some of you might know. It's for people who are into records and vinyl, and it sort of tells you which are the rare ones and all of that. And I enjoyed that magazine and thought it would be great if there was sort of a video game version of that. I was into games, and so I wrote to a magazine publisher and said, what do you think about this idea? Could I maybe, run that for you or something? And I didn't know what I was doing. And they invited me to their office, and I had a meeting with them, and they said, explained how much it costs to launch a magazine and get it in W.H. Smith and sort of put a dampener on that idea. But they said, why don't you write some freelance, words for some of our existing magazines? And that's really how I started. So, yeah, for the first few years, I mainly wrote about technology because that's how I got into it.
So you played a lot of games then, did you?
Yeah, great, yeah.
This is a very important question, right? Do you play Fortnite?
Yeah, I was an early adopter of Fortnite. I love Fortnite. I think it's amazing. I play it with my kids.
Does everybody know what Fortnite is?
So Fortnite is a game that came out sort of last summer, and it's sort of the big phenomenon at the moment. You may remember Minecraft was the big game about 5 years ago. Today it's Fortnite. Everyone under the age of 15 probably plays Fortnite. I won't get into how you play it, but yeah, it's fun. I like it. There's lots of stories in the mainstream press at the moment about how it's causing our children to become addicted and all of that nonsense. So, but
why do you think that's nonsense then? Is that too long a story, really?
Because there's. Let's not.
Anyone who wants to know that, ask him afterwards. All right. Brilliant. I loved it because my mum yesterday said to me, Becca, she said, I think I should watch Love Island some of the time so that I understand what my grandchildren are into, right? And then she said, but I don't think I'll be able to get into Fortnite. But
never too late for Fortnite.
Too late for Fortnite, yeah. So you write lots of the songs, and you write some of the songs that we sing. Can you just talk about like worship songs and how you see that's developed over the years? And sometimes people say to me, oh, why aren't we singing more kind of straightforward songs about Jesus and about like we would have in the old back 20 years ago? Why aren't we singing those sorts of songs? And I know that you've got some really interesting things to say about that. So what do you think, how do you think that's developed, like the way that we worship over the years, especially thinking about the words that we use?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in a moment where lyrics tend to be a little more poetic, perhaps, at times. So one of the things, if you write for the internet today, the publication can track all sorts of interesting data. So firstly, they can see how many people are clicking on an article, but more than that, they can also see how long you sit and you read the article for, whether you use the scroll wheel to go down. So they know not only have, 50,000 people read this article, but they also know whether they actually read it or they just clicked on it. So my job as a writer is to try to get as many people who click on a story or open a newspaper to make it to the end of the story. And there's a bunch of techniques you use for that, which I won't go into, but one of the things that turns people off when they're reading, that causes them to sort of move on to read something else, is the use of kind of cliches or things that are very familiar over familiar. So as a writer, you're constantly trying to avoid sort of figures of speech because they just bounce off people and it causes them to stop kind of reading and being engaged. And it's to do with over familiarity sort of makes you complacent. It sort of makes you think, well, I already know this. And when you're complacent, it sort of stops you from being engaged. So you're constantly trying to find new, interesting ways to say things. One of the ways that we talked about at Arkyard, which is the thing Tim runs for songwriters, is how can we find like new words, new phrases to express old truths, to make them come alive again. And a good example of like a cliche, like if someone comes up to me and says, where do I get a coffee after the service? And I might say, well, you can get one around the corner at the kitchen. It's just a stone's throw over there. So rather than me saying, like, it's 50 meters around there, I'm saying it's, if I chucked a stone, you could go and get a coffee. Now you sort of know the distance. Now that's like a figure of speech that we're all like incredibly familiar with now. So we don't even catch the sort of beauty in that statement. Like the first person who said, something is a stone's throw away. They were kind of a genius, right? Because it's such a beautiful picture. So as a writer, you're trying to find these new ways to sort of communicate old truths. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot in songwriting at the moment. So you sort of think of a few examples, like a song like Reckless Love with that line, he leaves the 99. Now that's sort of a very old truth. It's based on like Jesus' parable about how God will leave the 99 sheep. He's the good shepherd. He'll leave 99 to go and find the one that's gone astray. And that's a very kind of interesting lyric. It sort of pricks your ear, doesn't it? You go, oh, that's an unusual line. I'm not used to hearing. Another one is heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss, which is maybe a little more controversial. I know some churches refuse to sing that, but again, there's something beautiful about that image, maybe, where like in that it's trying to re-express something that's very familiar. I see it in pop music all the time. I was watching a great interview with a songwriter who wrote Shape of You with Ed Sheeran, and he was saying they wrote that song very quickly, and when they were in the studio, Ed was kind of putting down his lyrics, and he had that line, and my bed sheets smell like you, and the co-writer was kind of like, are you sure you want to say that? Should we change that? It's kind of like, it's like a picture, but it's maybe a bit gross or something. And Ed was like, no, it absolutely has to be that line. And when you first hear that song, we've all heard that song a billion times, but the first time you hear it, that's the one that really jumps out, right? Because it's so unusual. So I think there's a good sort of principle there. And then if you look back at the hymns from 100 years ago, they were constantly doing this. Like a song like When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, right? That line, were the whole realm of nature mine, that was an offering far too small, love so amazing, so divine, demands my life, my soul, my all, something like that. Like, that's not in the Bible. Isaac Watts, I think, wrote that. And he's written this amazing piece of poetry that just brings to life all of these biblical truths in a new way. And, like, it's still got power to today, 100 years ago or whatever. And to sort of back up why I think you're on solid ground doing that, if you look at what Jesus did in his teaching, he would often like talk in parables, right? These are like stories that he basically made up to sort of draw out a truth, to like take a truth that had become a cliche, that people have become sort of dull to. It's sort of a way of polishing that up again and go, no, look at it again. And I think you can imagine sort of the church leaders or the Pharisees in the back with their arms crossed going, well, why is this guy making up a story? We already have the law. We already have God's word. We don't need this like silly little picture story to express that truth again. But Jesus is doing it because we get sort of dulled to it. A good example of this, I'll shut up in a moment, but a good example of this is like the Good Samaritan. So that's a story that I think even if you're not a Christian, you've probably grown up knowing that story, right? So just to sum it up, a guy's walking along a road, he gets mugged, he gets beaten up, left for dead, all of his belongings are taken. And then sort of a series of well-to-do people come, and some of them switch over to the other side of the road, they all basically leave him for dead. And then this one guy, the Good Samaritan, comes along and he sort of picks him up, checks him into a hotel, pays for him for the night. And we sort of, in 2018, we don't really know what a Samaritan is. So we just see that story as oh, that's a story about how we should be kind for people who are in need. But actually, if you look at the original context in which Jesus was telling that story, it's incredibly provocative. The Samaritans were the mortal enemies of the Jews at that time. So you can imagine if he was retelling that story today to Jews in Israel, it would be like the story of the good Palestinian, or if it was here, it might be the story of the good benefit cheat, or the good sort of asylum seeker, or depending on your point of view, the good UKIP candidate or something like that. Someone who you as a listener sort of personally look down on. You would be, and he's not doing that to say, hey, we need to rethink about the Samaritans. We need to reappraise what they're like. The point is, he's pointing a finger at the listener and going, beware looking down on other people that you think you're better than, because very often they might have caught one of God's truths that you've missed. And sort of, we miss all of that, don't we? Because it's become a cliche again. But if you go back and look at what Jesus was doing in that moment, he's telling that parable to sort of bring alive God's word and to go, stop being complacent. This is what it's all about. And that's why we sing funny words sometimes.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. Yeah. One last thing that I was going to ask you. There have been times, you've led worship here for a long time, haven't you? And there have been times that you've led and are in complete vulnerability. How do you lead when you feel vulnerable sometimes? Just talk a little bit about that in your journey.
A few years ago, I was going through a particularly rough patch. Nikki and I were in marriage counselling, and I was in therapy, and a lot of stuff that just needed dealing with, I guess, that I hadn't dealt with was sort of coming to the fore, and sort of, I guess, in that process, God was trying to set things straight that were crooked in me or whatever. And, we would meet regularly and talk, and I would still sort of, even in that valley, I guess, I was still leading worship here, and I think sometimes I would think, I don't know if it's sort of, maybe I need to sort this stuff out before I can get up on a stage and do that kind of thing. But then at the same time, there was just I felt an immense closeness to God in that period of my life, because I was able to sort of worship in this very difficult place. And I was able to bring that to God in my worship and meet him where I was, or he would meet me where I was. And I think as well, sort of particularly with music, when so many of the songs we sing in church are about God's grace, his faithfulness, his being there for us when we're in the valley. And when that is going on in your life and you are singing about it and bringing that as your offering, there's something incredibly magical almost happens in that, I think. I watched, I'm sure many of you have seen it, the James Corden video that he did with Paul McCartney this week. His carpool karaoke. And he came out a couple of days ago. But James Corden, whatever you think of him, he will sometimes get in a car and drive around with a pop star. And he did it with Paul McCartney this week, and it's a really amazing 20 minutes. In that, Paul McCartney talks a little bit about the song "Let It Be," and he says that when he wrote that song, he had a dream. His mother had passed away. He had a dream. He was full of anxiousness and fear and worry about how the world was going. And he met his mother in this dream, and she said the words, "Just let it be." And when he woke up, he sort of remembered it, he wrote it down, then he wrote this song. And then, in the car, the two of them sing it together. And, I'm sure, James Corden's heard that song a million times, but because he had the context of, what that song was written in, he's sort of, tears up and sort of loses it a little bit. And I think songs are incredibly powerful when you connect what's happening in your life to what you're singing about. Eric Clapton's song, Tears in Heaven, it's a very pretty song, but when he wrote that song after his little son died, it takes on a whole new power. Taylor Swift, when she's singing about her latest breakup or whatever, that takes on a new power when it's coming out of a place of actually I'm hurt and I'm damaged or whatever in this. So I think that some of that is true in church just as it is elsewhere, and I think people maybe connect with that when we're all worshipping together and you're on stage and you're being truthful with where your life's at and you're singing songs that reflect that, and we do that as a community and corporately. There's tremendous power in that.
Wow. Si, I think you're brilliant. You're I know that not many people will know those things about you, and I know that you don't shout about those things, but I think you got such wisdom, and I thank you for your vulnerability and just for your words. been amazing. Let's give him a round of applause, shall we? Thank you. Oh, is there anything else?